She was just a 7-year-old girl. She'd been living on the streets of Chicago, scavenging to survive since she was 5. Her mother, Anne Claire, had been a nurse for 15 years before she died in a car accident. Back then, the doctors said there was nothing to be done, that her fate was already sealed. But what this little girl held in her heart, unbeknownst to her, was about to change a powerful man's life forever. Her name was Lily. Her brown eyes still sparkled, despite the pain she had carried since she was small. She had no home, no toys, no childhood like other children did. But she had something money could never buy, her mother's teachings etched into her soul. And Claire always used to say that hugs save more than medicine, that love heals invisible wounds, and Lily carried these words like a secret treasure hidden in the frayed pocket of her old pants. Across the city, in a wealthy neighborhood filled with mansions and imported cars, Richard Alcott wept alone. He was one of the richest men in the United States, the owner of a network of private clinics scattered across the country. But in that moment, sitting on a worn wooden bench in Lincoln Park, he was nothing more than a broken man. The diagnosis had arrived that morning. The disease that had nearly killed him 15 years ago was back. 6 months to live at most, the doctors had said with pitiful glances he hated. Richard breathed with difficulty as tears streamed uncontrollably down the face he had always kept impassive in business meetings. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, colors too beautiful for such a dark moment. The smell of cut grass mingled with the distant odor of garbage from the nearby dumpsters. He no longer cared about anything, not the curious stares of the few passers-by, not the meeting he had cancelled, not the empire he had built. Everything felt empty, meaningless, as if his entire life had been a great waste of time. It was then that he heard a soft sound, the squeak of old wheels on a makeshift shopping cart. Richard lifted his swollen eyes and saw a small silhouette slowly approaching along the park path. It was a thin girl in dirty clothes, but with a clean face, pushing a cart full of plastic bottles and crushed cans. She stopped a few feet from him, watching with curiosity and something that looked like compassion. How could such a small, so visibly destitute child feel compassion for someone like him? The absurdity of the situation almost made him laugh through his tears. Lily didn't know who this man in the expensive suit and a watch that gleamed on his wrist was. She didn't know he had an 8-figure bank account or that he managed hundreds of employees. All she saw was a human being crying alone in a park at dusk. And her mother always said, "Lily, my sweet girl, when you see someone crying, don't ask why, just hug them. Because sometimes people don't need words, they just need to know they're not alone." That lesson echoed in her mind like a song you never forget. The girl took a few hesitant steps toward the man. Her bare feet made little noise on the grass, still damp from the previous rainy afternoon. Richard watched her, not understanding what was happening, unable to process why a street kid was approaching him. She stopped right in front of him, so small she barely reached his knees. Then without a word, Lily opened her arms and wrapped Richard in an awkward but sincere hug. The shock was so great that he was paralyzed for a few seconds. "Everything's going to be okay," Lily whispered in her thin voice, tightening the hug a little more. "My mom used to say that hugs save more than money. She said that when we hug someone who's crying, we share the pain and it gets lighter." Richard felt something break inside his chest, a wall he had built over years of cold business deals and superficial relationships. He returned the hug, clutching the frail child to his chest, as if she were the last real thing he had left in the world. He cried even harder, but this time they were not just tears of despair. They stayed like that for minutes that felt like hours. The park around them continued its routine, dogs chasing balls, couples walking hand in hand, street vendors packing up their stalls to leave. But on that bench in that moment, There was only a pure, unlikely human connection between a condemned millionaire and a girl invisible to society's eyes. When they finally separated, Richard looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. Genuine kindness, with no ulterior motives, no self-interest, no games. Just the kind of unconditional love he didn't even know still existed. Who are you?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse from crying, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Lily smiled shyly, revealing a missing front tooth. "My name is Lily, and you don't have to be alone, okay? My mom said nobody should ever cry alone." She pulled a small, crumpled photo from her pocket, protected by clear plastic. "This was my mum. She died, but she left a lot of good things inside me. She was a nurse, you know. She spent all day saving people." Richard took the photo with trembling hands, and something in his chest tightened. That face! He knew that face from somewhere deep in his memory. Before the conversation could continue, before Richard could ask more questions or understand the strange connection he felt, Lily heard voices in the distance and her whole body tensed. "I have to go," she said quickly, putting the photo back in her little pocket. "The park security doesn't like it when we stay in one place for too long. But, are you going to be okay? Promise you'll find someone to talk to?" Richard tried to gently take her arm. "Wait, please. Let me help you. You shouldn't be on the street, you're just a child." But Lily was already grabbing her cart. "I get by, mister. I learned from my mum. She used to say we're stronger than we think." And with that, she disappeared among the park trees before Richard could say another word, leaving him alone again, but somehow different than he was before. 15 years earlier, Richard Alcott was a 23-year-old man completely different from the man he would become. He had inherited a considerable fortune from his parents, who died in a plane crash when he was just 18. With no one to set limits or offer guidance, Richard dove headfirst into a life of excess and self-destruction. Parties every night in luxurious penthouses, expensive drinks he didn't even know the names of, drugs that promised artificial paradises. He thought he was happy, that he was living life to the fullest. Mornings came late for Richard back then, usually accompanied by brutal hangovers and hazy memories of the night before. He would wake up in a different place each day, sometimes in his apartment, sometimes at the homes of friends he barely knew, other times in 5-star hotels where he had caused some scandal. His social circle was composed of people who flattered him for his money, smiling parasites who would vanish at the first sign of trouble. But Richard didn't see it, or pretended not to, because the alternative would be to admit he was profoundly alone, despite always being surrounded by people. It was on one of those endless party nights that everything fell apart. Richard had mixed alcohol with substances his young body couldn't process properly. He vaguely remembered feeling his heart race uncontrollably, being unable to breathe properly, falling to the nightclub floor as the lights flashed frantically to the beat of electronic music. His friends had panicked, not knowing what to do with a millionaire convulsing in the middle of the dance floor. Someone had the decency to call an ambulance before they all fled to avoid trouble with the police. Richard woke up 3 days later in a hospital room, connected to a multitude of machines that beeped and monitored his vital signs. The white light from the ceiling was too bright for his sensitive eyes. He tried to move, but his body felt like it was made of lead. Every movement was a Herculean effort. It was then that a soft voice reached him. "Easy now. You're safe. Don't try to move yet. Your body needs time to recover." Richard turned his head slowly and saw a nurse with kind eyes and a tired smile adjusting one of the IV tubes. She had brown hair tied in a bun and looked to be in her early 30s. What happened?" Richard managed to whisper, his throat dry and sore. The nurse held a cup of water with a straw, helping him drink slowly. "You had a severe overdose. Your heart stopped twice on the way here. It was a very close call." She spoke without judgment, only with the professional calm of someone who had seen similar situations dozens of times. "But you're alive, and that's what matters now. My name is Anne Claire. I've been taking care of you since you arrived." Over the following days, as Richard slowly recovered, Anne Claire was always around during her night shifts. She didn't ask about his life, didn't lecture him on his choices, didn't treat him differently for being rich. She simply cared for him with the same dedication she would give any patient. Sometimes they talked about trivial things, the weather, TV shows, how bad the hospital food was. Anne Claire occasionally mentioned her little daughter Lily, who was only 3 at the time. "She's my everything," she'd say with a smile that lit up her tired face. "I work these night shifts so I can spend my days with her." One of those nights, when Richard was almost ready to be discharged, he asked, "Why do you do this? This job, I mean. Night shifts, dealing with people like me who self-destruct. Isn't it exhausting?" Anne Claire stopped what she was doing and looked at him with those kind eyes. "You know, I could say it's just a job, that I need to pay the bills. But the truth is, I believe everyone deserves a second chance. You almost died, Richard. This can be the end of your story, or the beginning of a new one. The choice is yours." Those words stuck in his mind, even after he was discharged and returned to his life. But Richard wasn't ready to change. In the weeks following his hospitalization, he tried to cut back on the excesses, but soon fell back into his old habits. The parties continued. The drugs were still there. The loneliness disguised as popularity persisted. He never went back to that hospital, never tried to properly thank Anne Claire, never gave much thought to the nurse who had cared for him during his most vulnerable days. She was just another person who had crossed his path and disappeared, or so he thought. Life continued its destructive course, while Richard pretended he was in control of everything. It took another 2 years and another emergency hospitalization for Richard to finally understand that he needed to change radically. This time was different. He sought professional help, checked into a rehabilitation clinic, cut ties with all the parasites that surrounded him. It was a painful process of reconstruction that lasted for years. When he finally emerged on the other side, Richard was unrecognizable. Sober, focused, determined to turn his parents' inheritance into something meaningful. That's how his network of clinics was born, an empire built on the ashes of who he used to be. Now, 15 years after those dark days, sitting on that park bench after Lily's hug, Richard held the crumpled photo of her mother, and a distant memory began to take shape. That face. Anne Claire. The nurse who had cared for him with such dedication and kindness, the woman who had planted a seed of change in his mind, even when he wasn't ready to accept it, and the little girl who had just hugged him, who had the same kind eyes and the same hopeful smile, was her daughter. The cruel irony of fate hit him like a punch to the gut. The woman who had saved him was dead, and her daughter was living on the streets, scavenging, while he amassed millions. Richard spent the entire night unable to sleep. Lying in the king-sized bed of his minimalist bedroom, he stared at the white ceiling, while Anne Claire's crumpled photo rested on the nightstand beside him. The full moon shone through the panoramic window, casting long shadows that looked like accusing fingers pointing at him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the kind face of the nurse who had saved him 15 years ago, followed by Lily's toothless grin offering a hug to a stranger. How was it possible that this woman's daughter was living on the streets while he slept on Egyptian cotton sheets? At 5 in the morning, Richard gave up on trying to sleep and went to his home office. He turned on his computer with trembling hands and began to obsessively search for Anne Claire Smith, the name he finally managed to recall after hours of sifting through hazy memories. He found her records at the hospital where she had worked. 15 years of exemplary service, specializing in intensive care, deceased 2 years ago in a traffic accident. There was no mention of family, no detailed obituary, just an information void that reflected how society treats those who serve silently. A rage began to build inside him, not directed at anyone in particular, but at the entire system. At 8 o'clock, his cell phone began to ring insistently. It was Dr. Harrison, his personal physician, and one of the few people he considered a true friend. "Richard, we need to talk about your treatment. The sooner we start aggressive chemotherapy, the better the chances of—" Richard cut him off, his voice firm. "I'm not starting any treatment yet, Harry. I need to take care of something first, something I should have taken care of 15 years ago." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with concern. "Richard, you have 6 months at most. Every day that passes without treatment reduces your chances." But Richard had already hung up, his mind completely focused on finding Lily again. For the next 3 days, Richard did something he had never done. He cancelled all his business meetings and spent his days in Lincoln Park. He walked the same paths repeatedly, sat on the same bench where Lily had found him, and watched every street kid who passed by with a collection cart. Other park-goers began to look at him strangely. Why was a man in an expensive suit spending hours sitting alone, staring into space? He didn't care about appearances. His entire fortune and reputation seemed insignificant compared to the urgent need to find that girl and do what was right. It was on the 4th day that Richard finally saw her again. Lily was near the lagoon, crouching down to feed some ducks with pieces of stale bread she had likely found in the trash. The morning light created a golden halo around her disheveled hair, and for a moment Richard saw in her not just a helpless child, but a disguised angel sent to save him in a completely different way than Anne Claire had years ago. He approached slowly, trying not to startle her, his heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. "Lily," he called softly when he was a few feet away. The girl turned quickly, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of fear. She took an instinctive step back, ready to run if necessary, her small body tense like a drawn bowstring. You're the man who was crying," she finally said, recognizing him but still cautious. Richard held up his hands in a peaceful gesture, showing he meant no harm. "Yes, that's me, and you helped me in a way you can't imagine. Please, don't run. I just want to talk to you. I promise I won't do anything to hurt you." There was something in his voice, a desperate sincerity, that made Lily relax slightly. "What do you want to talk about?" Lily asked, still keeping a safe distance, but not running away. The ducks around her continued to peck at the crumbs, oblivious to the crucial moment unfolding between the two humans. Richard sat down on the dew-damp ground, not caring that his designer pants were getting dirty, a gesture that put him on the girl's physical level. "About your mother. About Anne Claire. I knew her, Lily. She saved my life a long time ago when I was very sick, and I never properly thanked her, never knew what happened to her." Tears began to well up in his eyes again. Lily took a few hesitant steps toward him, the mention of her mother disarming her defenses. "You knew my mom, for real. She used to talk so much about the people she helped at the hospital." She sat on the ground too, still maintaining a few feet of distance, but clearly interested. "She was the most amazing person I ever knew. Always tired, always working, but always happy when she came home. She said saving lives was her purpose." The girl's voice trembled with restrained emotion, and Richard realized she rarely had the opportunity to talk about her mother with someone who genuinely cared. "Lily," Richard began, choosing his words carefully, I need to do something for you. Your mother gave me a second chance at life when I didn't deserve it, and now you're living on the streets when you should be in school, playing, being a kid. It's not right. Please let me help you. Let me at least make sure you have a safe place to sleep, food, and education." He spoke quickly, afraid she would run off before he could express everything. I'm not asking for anything in return. I don't want to control your life. I just want to honor your mother's memory by doing for you what she would have done if she were alive." Lily looked at him for a long moment, her brown eyes assessing his sincerity with a wisdom beyond her 7 years. Life on the streets had taught her to distrust adults, especially the rich ones who sometimes offered help with dark, ulterior motives. But there was something different about this man. Something in the way he spoke of her mother with genuine respect, in the way his hands trembled with emotion, in the way he had allowed himself to cry in front of her. "My mom always said that when God closes a door, he opens a window," Lily said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "Maybe you're the window, mister, but I'm scared. I've trusted grown-ups before and they hurt me." Lily's words struck Richard like arrows to the heart. The thought of that innocent child having been hurt by adults she trusted filled him with a protective rage he didn't know he was capable of feeling. "Lily, I swear on your mother's memory that I will never hurt you. And if you give me a chance, I will do everything in my power to make sure no one else ever hurts you again." He took his wallet out of his pocket and showed her his ID. "My name is Richard Alcott. I own a network of medical clinics. You can ask anyone about me. My life is public. I have nothing to hide." Lily took the wallet carefully, looking at the ID photo and comparing it to the face in front of her. She couldn't read very well yet, but she could identify some letters. "Richard," she spelled out slowly, tracing the name with her small finger. "That's a nice name. My mom sometimes talked about a patient named Richard she helped when I was very little. Could that have been you?" The possibility made her face light up with a mixture of astonishment and joy. Richard nodded, unable to speak for a moment due to the lump in his throat. "Yes, Lily, that was me. Your mother saved me when I was dying because of the stupid choices I made." In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Lily stood up and without warning hugged Richard tightly, her thin arms wrapping around his neck as if she were clinging to a life raft in a stormy ocean. "So you're the overdose man Mommy saved. She used to talk about you sometimes. Said she wondered if you'd managed to turn your life around. She prayed for you, you know. Even without really knowing you, she prayed that you would find your way." Richard couldn't hold back the tears that flowed freely down his face as he hugged the child who represented everything he had lost and everything he could still redeem. The moment was interrupted by a harsh voice from behind them. "Hey, Lily, what are you doing hugging that playboy?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Joan, a woman in her 60s who lived in a makeshift tent near the park and sometimes shared food with Lily. She approached with suspicion, her experienced eyes sizing up Richard from head to toe. "These rich folks only want one thing from a street kid, Lily. You should know better than that, girl." The implicit accusation in her words made Richard stand up quickly, understanding how this must look. "Ma'am, it's not what it seems. I knew Lily's mother years ago. She saved my life, and I just want to help her daughter, that's all." Mrs. Jones spat on the ground, a gesture of contempt that spoke volumes about her experiences with empty promises. "Oh, really? And how many like you have I seen make those promises? How many good men have I seen take children with promises of help, only to end up in the news with horrible stories?" She pulled Lily behind her, creating a protective barrier with her frail but determined body. "Lily stays with me, you understand? She may not have much, but at least she's safe." Richard understood her suspicion perfectly and, honestly, respected it. A woman who protected vulnerable children from predators was exactly the kind of person he admired. "You have every right to be cautious," Richard said calmly, making no sudden moves. "And I respect that. But give me a chance to prove my intentions. Look, I have a proposal." He took out his cell phone and made a quick call. "Harry? Yes, it's me. I need you to come to Lincoln Park now, by the lagoon. Bring the documents about the Social Assistance Institute we're planning to open. Yes, now." He hung up and looked at Mrs. Joan. My doctor is bringing documents proving I'm creating an institute to help children in street situations. Lily won't just be a beneficiary, she'll be the inspiration, the name on the building." Mrs. Jones' eyes narrowed with skepticism, but she didn't stop Richard from continuing. "More than that, I want to legally adopt Lily. I want to give her everything her mother, Anne Claire, would have given her if she was still alive. Education, a home, a family, a future. I'm not asking for this lightly. I know I have no right to ask, that I don't deserve this wonderful child. But please, give me the chance to do the right thing." There was such sincere desperation in his voice that even Mrs. Jones seemed momentarily disarmed. Lily turned to look at the older woman, her eyes pleading for permission to believe, to hope. While they waited for Dr. Harrison to arrive, the three sat on a nearby bench, in a silence thick with tension. Lily was in the middle, between Mrs. Jones and Richard, physically representing the choice that needed to be made. Richard broke the silence by telling his full story, his wasted youth, the night he almost died, how Anne Claire cared for him with a kindness he didn't deserve, his recovery, and the building of his business empire. "But none of it meant anything until yesterday," he admitted. "I built an empire on top of an empty life. Lily showed me that when she gave me a hug without expecting anything in return." His voice was heavy with raw emotion. 20 minutes later, Dr. Harrison arrived in a hurry, carrying a folder of documents and clearly confused about why he had been summoned so urgently. Richard introduced everyone and quickly explained the situation. Harrison, being a compassionate doctor who had known Richard for years, understood immediately. He opened the folder and showed Mrs. Jones the detailed plans for the Anne Claire Institute, including budgets, architectural proposals, and educational programs. "Richard showed me these plans 2 weeks ago," Harrison explained. "Even before he found Lily again, he was already planning this. The difference is that now it has a face, a personal purpose." Mrs. Jones examined the documents carefully, her lips moving silently as she tried to read the parts she could understand. Lily watched everything with wide eyes, trying to grasp the implications of it all. Finally, Mrs. Jones sighed deeply and looked at Lily. "Girl, I can't decide for you. But I'll tell you one thing, your mother wouldn't want you living on the streets. She worked 3 shifts sometimes just to give you a better life. If this man here is telling the truth, if he really knew your mother and wants to honor her memory, maybe you should give him a chance." It was the blessing Lily needed to hear. "Okay," Lily said in a small but determined voice, looking directly into Richard's eyes. "But I have conditions. First, Mrs. Jones can visit me whenever she wants. Second, I want to help other kids like me, so I'll work at that institute when I'm older. Third, you have to promise me in front of everyone here that you'll never forget my mother, that everything you do for me is because of her." Richard solemnly extended his hand, and Lily shook it with her small, dirt-stained one. "I promise all of that, Lily. On the memory of Anne Claire, the woman who saved me when I didn't deserve to be saved, I promise." The following days were a whirlwind of bureaucratic and emotional activity. Richard hired the best lawyers specializing in adoption and children's rights. Lily underwent comprehensive medical exams at the best pediatric clinic in Chicago, revealing malnutrition and some treatable infections, but nothing severe. Social workers got involved. Investigations were conducted into Richard's past and his suitability as an adoptive father. Every step of the process was painful and time-consuming, but Richard faced it all with steely determination, refusing to take no for an answer. And Lily, for the first time in 2 years, began to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. But not everything was rosy. In the second week after their reunion, while Richard was working on the adoption papers, he had his first serious medical crisis. He was in a meeting with lawyers when he felt a piercing pain in his chest and collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, where Dr. Harrison confirmed what they both already knew. Time was running out faster than they expected. "Richard, you need to start treatment now," Harrison insisted, as Richard lay in the hospital bed connected to monitors. "If you do nothing, you won't live to see Lily grow up. You won't be there for her." And that stark reality made Richard finally accept that he needed to fight not just for Lily, but for himself as well. But another obstacle was looming on the horizon, one Richard hadn't anticipated. His distant relatives, cousins, uncles he barely knew, but who were very interested in his considerable fortune, began to surface when news of the adoption leaked. They claimed to be concerned about his mental state, questioned whether a terminal illness was causing him to make irrational decisions, and suggested that Lily was an opportunist taking advantage of a dying man. The accusations were absurd to anyone who knew the real story, but legally they created complications. A battle was brewing, and Richard realized he would have to fight not only for his life and for Lily, but also against people who should have been his family, but only saw dollar signs where there should have been love. Lily, temporarily placed in a transitional home while the papers were being processed, didn't fully understand the complexity of the situation. But she sensed something was wrong when Richard's visits came with increasingly sunken eyes and paler skin. "Are you sick?" she asked one afternoon as they colored together in a book he had brought. Richard hesitated, not wanting to lie but also not wanting to scare her. "Yes, Lily, I am. The same sickness I had when your mother saved me has come back. But I'm fighting, okay? I'm getting treatment, and I'm going to fight with all my strength to stay here with you as long as I can." Lily squeezed his hand with a surprising firmness for such a small child. "Then I'll pray for you just like my mom used to. And you'll get better because you still have a lot to do here." 3 weeks had passed since their first reunion in the park. Richard sat in the waiting room of the family and probate court, wearing a grey suit that no longer fit quite right due to the weight loss from aggressive chemotherapy. Beside him, Lily nervously fidgeted with her hands, wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Joan had bought for her specially for the day. The hearing that would decide their future was about to begin, and they could both feel the tension in the thick air of the room. Dr. Harrison was there too, along with Richard's legal team, all wearing serious expressions. Across the room, Richard's cousins conferred in low voices with their own lawyers. There were mainly 3. Morris, a portly 45-year-old who had never worked a day in his life thanks to family inheritance. Clara, a 50-year-old woman with excessive jewelry and an air of superiority. And Ferdinand, the youngest at 38, who at least tried to look respectable in his well-tailored suit. They looked at Lily with a mixture of disdain and calculation, as if she were an inconvenient obstacle between them and what they considered their rightful inheritance. Lily shrank under their gazes, and Richard instinctively put his arm around her shoulders, creating a protective barrier. "Everything's going to be okay," he whispered to her, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Lily or himself. The girl looked up, her brown eyes filled with a sad wisdom beyond her years. "I know you're trying, Mr. Richard. You're trying, mister. But what if they don't let us stay together? What if they send me back to a shelter?" Her voice trembled slightly. Richard tightened his embrace. "I won't let that happen, Lily. I promised your mother's memory I would take care of you, and I will keep that promise if it's the last thing I do." There was a fierce determination in his voice that made Lily nod, trying to believe him. The courtroom door opened, and a clerk called them all inside. The room was austere. White walls, a large dark wood table where the judge would sit, chairs arranged for the involved parties. Judge Anthony Carver entered moments later, a man with graying hair and an impartial expression who had presided over thousands of similar cases in his 30-year career. He looked at everyone present with the air of someone who has seen it all and is not easily impressed. "Good morning," We are here to rule on the petition for guardianship and adoption of Lily Smith by Richard Alcott. Is that correct? Everyone nodded, and the game began. Richard's lawyer, Dr. Bernard, spoke first. He presented the case methodically, how Richard had met Anne Claire years ago when she saved him from an overdose, how he had rediscovered Lily by chance, how he discovered the connection between them, and how he wanted to honor the nurse's memory by caring for her daughter. He showed the detailed plans for the Anne Claire Institute, financial documents proving Richard had more than enough resources to care for Lily, and psychological evaluations showing he was mentally competent despite his terminal illness. Dr. Harrison testified to Richard's character, his transformation over the years, and how finding Lily had given his life new purpose. Then it was the opposition's turn. The lawyer for Morris, Clara, and Ferdinand stood up with an oily smile that made Richard's stomach churn. Your Honor, we do not question that my client Richard Alcott is a man of means. We also do not question that he has good intentions, or at least believes he does. But we must question his judgment at this time. He paused dramatically, letting the tension build in the room. Richard is dying. He has 6 months to live at most, according to his own doctors. He is on heavy medication that affects his mental faculties. In this vulnerable condition, would it not be reasonable to suspect that he is being manipulated by a clever street child who saw an opportunity? Lily let out an audible gasp, her eyes filling with tears at being called a manipulator. Richard squeezed her hand tightly, sending silent support, while he felt rage boil inside him. The lawyer continued, "Furthermore, even if we accept that his intentions are pure, the fact remains. In a few months, this child will lose another father. Is it fair to put her through that trauma again? Would it not be more compassionate to leave her in a suitable shelter or with a young, healthy family who can care for her long term?" The argument was rationally sound, and Richard saw the judge's expression become thoughtful. He had to do something. He had to turn this around. "Your Honor," Richard stood up suddenly, ignoring his lawyer's gestures to sit down. "May I speak?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Everything their lawyer said is technically true. I am dying. I probably only have a few months. And yes, that will cause Lily pain. But let me ask you something. Is it better for her to spend those months in a cold institution with no one who truly cares about her, or with me, someone who will love her every single day I have left? Is it better for her to have a few months of a real family before I go, or no real family ever?" His voice trembled with raw emotion. "Lily's mother, Anne Claire, saved me when I was worthless, when I was just another rich drug addict wasting his life. She didn't have to do it. She had nothing to gain from it. But she did it because that's who she was, someone who saw value in every life. I wasted the second chance she gave me for years, but I finally built something meaningful. And when I found Lily again, I finally understood my purpose. It's not to accumulate more money. It's not to build a bigger empire. It's to ensure that the daughter of the woman who saved me has every opportunity her mother would have given her if she were alive." Richard was crying now, making no attempt to hide the tears. "Please, don't take this chance from me. Don't take this chance from Lily." The judge watched Richard in silence for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Lily. "Young lady, do you understand what is happening here?" Lily nodded slowly, wiping her own tears. "Yes, Your Honor. They think I'm tricking Mr. Richard because of his money. But I don't want the money. I just don't want to be alone again." Her voice broke. "My mum always said that family isn't just blood, it's who stays when things get hard. Mr. Richard is staying. He's sick, but he's staying. Doesn't that count for anything?" The judge made a note on his pad, then sighed deeply. "I will be frank with everyone here. This is one of the most complex and emotionally charged cases I have ever presided over. On one hand, there are legitimate questions about Mr. Alcott's health and the potential for additional trauma to the child. On the other, there is his right to spend his last months as he wishes and the clear desire of the child. I will need a recess to consider all the evidence. We will reconvene in 2 hours. He banged his gavel and left, leaving everyone in a suspended tension that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Richard and Lily sat, hands still clasped, while the cousins left with confident smiles that felt like knives in the heart. During the recess, they went to a small diner near the courthouse. Lily stirred her orange juice without really drinking it, while Richard tried to eat a sandwich despite his stomach being churned by chemotherapy and anxiety. Mrs. Joan had shown up to offer support, sitting with them at a corner table. "That judge seems fair," she said, trying to sound optimistic. "He'll see that you two belong together, you'll see." But there was an uncertainty in her voice that no one could ignore. It was then that Richard felt a sharp pain shoot through his chest, so intense that he dropped his sandwich. "Richard?" Dr. Harrison was by his side immediately, checking his pulse with experienced fingers. "Your pressure is dropping. We need to get you to a hospital now." But Richard shook his head vigorously, even as cold sweat beaded on his forehead. "No, not until after the hearing. I won't let those vultures use this against me, prove I'm too weak to care for Lily." The determination in his voice was absolute, even as his body was clearly failing. Harrison looked at him with a mixture of frustration and admiration. "You're impossible, you know that? But at least let me give you something for the pain." He injected something into Richard's arm, bringing temporary relief. When they returned to the courtroom, Richard was visibly paler, but he walked with his head held high. The judge immediately noticed the change, his experienced eyes missing nothing. "Mr. Alcott, are you all right? We can reschedule this hearing if necessary." But Richard firmly refused. "No, Your Honor. We've made Lily wait long enough. She deserves an answer today." Lily looked at him with concern, but squeezed his hand encouragingly, the 7-year-old child offering strength to a grown man. The role reversal was not lost on anyone in the room, and in a way, it proved exactly what Richard was arguing about mutual care. The judge adjusted his glasses and leafed through the documents before him. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented. Mr. Alcott's psychological evaluations are consistently positive. His financial history is impeccable. His personal transformation is well documented. The emotional connection between him and the child is clearly genuine." Richard felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest, but then the judge continued. "However, the fact remains that his life expectancy is severely limited. The question is not whether you would be a good father for the next few months, but whether it is fair to Lily to form this bond, knowing it will soon be broken." The hope began to flicker like a candle in the wind. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. The courtroom door opened and a woman in her 50s hurried in, followed by a younger man. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor, but I have information relevant to this case." She introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Mendez, the director of the hospital where Anne Claire had worked, accompanied by Charles, who had been her co-worker. Richard vaguely recognized them from the few times he had visited the hospital years ago. The judge, surprised but intrigued, allowed them to speak. "Anne Claire Smith was one of our best nurses," Dr. Mendez began, "and I have kept something she asked me to deliver if anything ever happened to her." She took a yellowed envelope from her purse. "Anne Claire gave this to me 5 years ago, after she was diagnosed with a heart condition that could kill her at any moment. She said that if she died, this should be given to Lily when she was old enough to understand. But when Anne Claire passed away in the accident, we couldn't locate the girl until I saw the news about this case yesterday." Dr. Mendez handed the envelope to the judge, who opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written in delicate cursive. The judge read it in silence, his eyebrows gradually rising. "This is extraordinary. With everyone's permission, I would like to read a few excerpts." "My dearest Lily," the judge began to read in a soft voice, "if you are hearing this, it means Mommy is already gone. I know it's hard, my love, but I need you to be strong. I want you to know a few important things. First, you are not alone in this world. There are good people out there, even if sometimes they're hard to find. Second, Mommy's job was to save lives, but the truth is, saving lives doesn't end at the hospital. It continues when we teach love, compassion, kindness. I tried to plant those seeds in you." The judge paused, clearing a throat that was becoming thick with emotion. Lily was crying silently, hearing her mother's words for the first time in years. The judge continued, "Third, and most importantly, remember that patient Mommy always mentioned, the young man, Richard, who almost died of an overdose. Mommy always prayed for him, always wondered if he managed to turn his life around. He represented for me the hope that no one is beyond redemption, that everyone deserves a second chance. If you ever find him, Lily, I hope you can help each other. Because the truth about saving people is that sometimes the one doing the saving needs to be saved too. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, my daughter. Mommy." The silence that followed was so profound, you could hear every person in the room breathing. Richard was emotionally devastated, tears streaming freely down his face as he processed the words. Anne-Claire had thought of him, had prayed for him, even years after caring for him. And somehow, through a miracle or fate or simply the universe conspiring, he and Lily had found each other exactly when they both needed it most. Charles, Anne-Claire's former colleague, stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may add something." Anne-Claire constantly talked about how motherhood had taught her that family isn't about biology. She raised Lily alone from birth, with no father present. She always said that what makes someone a parent is the daily choice to love and care, not DNA. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. When he spoke again, there was barely contained emotion in his normally impartial voice. "In 30 years on the bench, I have always tried to base my decisions on law and precedent, not on sentimentality. But the law must also serve justice, and justice isn't always black and white." He looked directly at Morris, Clara, and Ferdinand. "You argued that Richard should not have custody of Lily because he will soon die. But tell me, did any of you offer to adopt her? Did any of you show the slightest interest in her well-being beyond protecting your interests in the inheritance?" Their embarrassed silence was answer enough. "I didn't think so," the judge continued in a sterner tone. "This child is not a chess piece to be moved for your convenience. She's a human being who has already lost her mother, lived on the streets, and suffered traumas that many adults could not endure. And now, she's finally found someone who genuinely cares for her, someone willing to use his last days on Earth to secure her future. And you want to take that away because you're worried about money? Shameful." Morris tried to protest, but the judge silenced him with a look. "I am not finished." The authority in his voice was absolute, filling the entire room. It was at this critical moment that Richard felt another wave of pain, this time much worse than before. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant fist. He tried to hide it, but all the color drained from his face, and he slumped in his chair. Dr. Harrison was by his side instantly. "Richard, you're having a cardiac event. I need to call an ambulance now. This is not optional." But before he could do anything, Richard collapsed from his chair, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud that echoed horribly in the silent room. Lily screamed, jumping to his side. "Mr. Richard! Mr. Richard! Wake up!" Her voice was filled with absolute panic. Chaos erupted in the room. Dr. Harrison immediately began CPR while someone called an ambulance. The judge descended from the bench, his professional impartiality temporarily forgotten in the face of a human emergency. Lily was kneeling beside Richard, holding his limp hand and crying uncontrollably. "You promised you would fight. You promised you wouldn't leave me alone. Mommy, please, help him, please." Her choked words broke the hearts of everyone present. Even Clara looked uncomfortable, averting her eyes from the scene. Morris and Ferdinand simply stood there, clearly unsure how to react to such a raw and human situation. The paramedics arrived in minutes that felt like hours. They worked on Richard with professional efficiency, stabilizing him enough for transport. "He's alive, but he needs to go to the ICU immediately," the team leader informed them. Lily tried to climb into the ambulance with him but was gently stopped. "Sorry, sweetie, only family can go." The casual phrase brought on another round of tears from the girl. "But I am family. He's all I have. Please." Dr. Harrison quickly intervened. "I'm his doctor, and I'm going in the ambulance. Lily, you'll come with me in my car straight to the hospital, okay? I promise you'll see him." Lily nodded through her sobs, watching in horror as they carried Richard away on a stretcher. The judge, who had observed everything in thoughtful silence, spoke before everyone could leave. "Wait. I will issue my decision now, because this man deserves to know what I've decided before anything else." Everyone stopped, looking at him in surprise. The judge picked up his gavel with a slightly trembling hand. "After considering all the evidence, testimonies, and the extraordinary circumstances of this case, I grant immediate temporary custody of Lily Smith to Richard Alcott. The final adoption will be finalized after a 3-month evaluation period, assuming both parties still wish to proceed. As for the objectors," he looked harshly at the cousins, "any attempt to interfere with this arrangement or harass the child will result in severe legal action." Lily wasn't sure she understood all the legal words, but she understood the essential part. She could stay with Richard. A sob of relief mixed with fear escaped her throat. But the joy was tainted by the urgency of his situation. Mrs. Joan hugged Lily quickly. "Go on, girl. Go be with your father." The word father resonated with Lily in a way she never expected to feel again after her mother died. She ran after Dr. Harrison, who gently guided her out of the courthouse toward the hospital where Richard was fighting for his life. Behind them, the judge sat down heavily in his chair, feeling the emotional weight of the case in a way he rarely experienced in his long and storied career. Richard spent 4 days in the ICU at Chicago General Hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness as doctors fought to stabilize his failing heart. Lily never once left the hospital during that time. Mrs. Joan brought her clean clothes and food, but the girl barely touched it, preferring to sit in the waiting room, staring through the glass window into the room where Richard was surrounded by machines and tubes. Dr. Harrison updated her regularly, explaining in simple terms what was happening. "He's fighting, Lily, fighting hard. And I think a part of that fight is for you, because he promised not to leave you alone." In the early hours of the 5th day, something shifted. The monitors that had been beeping erratically for days began to show more stable patterns. Color gradually returned to Richard's face, and he finally opened his eyes completely. The first thing he saw was Lily asleep in an uncomfortable chair by his bed, her small hand loosely holding his. She had convinced the nurses to let her in after much insistence, promising to be quiet and not get in the way. Richard squeezed her hand lightly, and Lily woke instantly, her eyes wide and moist. "You're awake. You're really awake." She wanted to jump on him but restrained herself, mindful of all the wires and tubes. "I knew you would fight. I prayed just like my mom did. I promised I wouldn't leave you alone," Richard whispered, his voice hoarse from the intubation. Each word was an effort, but he needed her to know. "A promise is a promise, Lily." Tears streamed down the girl's face, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. Dr. Harrison entered moments later, clearly surprised to find Richard conscious and coherent. "You're impossible, you know that. The cardiologists were giving you minimal chances of recovery, but here you are, proving them all wrong." He checked the vitals and made some notes, shaking his head in unconcealed admiration. "I'll be blunt. This was a miracle. There's no other adequate medical explanation." Richard looked at Lily and smiled faintly. "It wasn't a miracle. It was love. I had something to fight for now." The following days brought gradual but consistent recovery. Richard was moved from the ICU to a private room where he could receive visitors more easily. Lily was constantly by his side, chattering about everything and nothing, bringing him drawings she made while he slept, reading children's books aloud in her still-developing English. She had missed 2 years of formal education living on the streets, but Richard had already hired private tutors who would start as soon as he was discharged. Mrs. Joan visited daily, bringing news from the outside world and sometimes homemade food that was infinitely better than the hospital meals. A family was forming there in that hospital room, unlikely but unquestionably real. In the second week of his stay, Judge Anthony Carver did something unusual. He visited in person. He entered the room, his normally stern expression softened by the circumstances. "Mr. Alcott, Miss Lily, I hope I'm not interrupting." Richard tried to sit up straighter in bed, but the judge gestured for him to stay comfortable. "Your Honor, I wasn't expecting—" The judge interrupted him gently. "I needed to see for myself. In 30 years in court, your case has affected me in a way few others have. I wanted to personally ensure you were both okay." He looked at Lily, who was watching him with wide eyes. "And I wanted to say, young lady, that you are lucky to have found this man, but he is even luckier to have found you." Lily smiled shyly, then asked with the frankness characteristic of children, "So we can really stay together? They're not going to take me away?" The judge knelt to be at her eye level, a surprisingly tender gesture from someone so austere. "No one is going to take you away, Lily. You are family now, recognized by the law and, more importantly, recognized here." He lightly touched his own chest, indicating his heart. "I finalized all the paperwork yesterday. As soon as Mr. Alcott is discharged and passes one final social services evaluation, the adoption will be official and irrevocable." The relief that flooded Lily's face was so intense that even the judge, accustomed to maintaining an emotional distance, felt his eyes sting. Richard was finally discharged from the hospital 3 weeks after his collapse in the courtroom, with strict medical instructions about medication, rest, and constant monitoring. Dr. Harrison was clear. "You got lucky this time, Richard. But we can't predict when or if there will be another crisis. Enjoy every day you have." They were somber but necessary words. Richard nodded in understanding, his hand instinctively reaching for Lily's, who stood beside the wheelchair the hospital required for his departure. "I know, Harry, and I will, every single day." As they passed through the hospital's automatic doors into the parking lot where a private car was waiting, Lily looked up at the blue sky and smiled. "Mommy, we did it," she whispered to the clouds. "We really did it." Richard's home was a spacious apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, with panoramic city views and minimalist decor that reflected his previously solitary life. But in the days that followed, everything changed. Lily was given the guest room, which was quickly transformed with the help of decorators, walls painted light blue, a new bed with a starry quilt, shelves filled with children's books, carefully selected toys. The girl walked through the apartment with wide, amazed eyes, touching everything gently as if afraid it might disappear. "Is all this really mine?" Richard, sitting on the sofa because he still tired easily, smiled broadly. "All yours, sweetheart. Your home, your family, your new life. The word sweetheart made Lily stop and look at him with tears in her eyes. You called me your daughter. Because that's what you are, Richard replied simply, holding out his arms. Lily ran to him, hugging him carefully so as not to hurt him, but with all the strength of love she possessed. They stayed like that for long minutes, two souls rescued by each other, each filling the voids that had existed before. In the following months, they developed routines and traditions. Breakfast together always, where Lily practiced reading with the newspaper, child-appropriate sections, of course. Afternoons with educational tutors to catch up on lost years, something Lily embraced with surprising enthusiasm. Evenings watching movies, or Richard telling stories about Anne Claire, keeping her mother's memory alive. Weekends visiting Mrs. Joan, whom Richard had insisted on setting up in her own nearby apartment, refusing to forget who had protected Lily on the streets. The Anne Claire Institute opened 4 months after the adoption in a renovated building in downtown Chicago. It was an ambitious project, a temporary shelter for street children, educational programs, vocational training, psychological support, all free and managed by dedicated professionals. At the opening ceremony, Richard was visibly weaker, but insisted on being present. Lily cut the ribbon beside him, wearing a special white dress for the occasion, as photographers captured the moment. There was a large plaque at the entrance with Anne Claire's photo, and the words, "In memory of those who save lives in silence. May this place be a light for those in darkness." Mrs. Joan cried openly, hugging Lily with pride. "Your mother would be so proud, girl, so proud." But the reality of Richard's condition could not be ignored indefinitely. 6 months after leaving the hospital, he began to decline again. The treatments were losing their effectiveness, and everyone knew time was running out. Dr. Harrison arranged for palliative care at home, ensuring Richard could spend his final days in the comfort of his home, surrounded by love instead of cold hospital machines. Lily, now 8 years old and showing impressive maturity, understood without anyone needing to explain it explicitly. She had seen death before with her mother. She knew the signs. But this time would be different. This time, she had a chance to say a proper goodbye, to say everything she needed to say. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Richard called Lily to sit with him on the sofa where they had spent so many hours together. He was noticeably thinner, his skin translucent, but his eyes still shone with the love Lily had learned to trust. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about some important things." Lily nodded bravely, holding his hand tightly. "I know, Dad. I know you're getting more tired." It was the first time she had called him Dad without hesitation, and Richard felt his chest tighten with emotion. "I'm not afraid to die anymore, Lily. Do you know why? Because you gave me the greatest gift anyone could ever receive: purpose. These months with you have been more valuable than all the years I lived before." "I don't want you to go," Lily said, her voice trembling but firm. "But I know. I know sometimes we don't get to choose. My mom taught me that when she left, but this time is different. This time I got to really know you. I got to be your daughter. I got to have a real family. So even if it hurts a lot when you go, I'll treasure everything we had." Tears streamed down her face, but there was a courageous acceptance in her words that made Richard cry too. "You are the strongest person I know, Lily. Stronger than me, for sure." He pulled an envelope from his shirt pocket. "I wrote a letter for you to read when I'm no longer here, and another one for your mother, which I want you to read at her grave for me." The following weeks were bittersweet. Richard continued to decline gradually, but there was a peace to his journey. Lily read to him, showed him her progress in school. She was already nearly at the right level for her age. Told him about the children at the Anne Claire Institute he had helped. Mrs. Joan visited daily, as did Dr. Harrison, who had become more of a friend than a doctor. Even Judge Carver appeared one last time, talking at length with Richard about legacy and meaning. On the second to last night, Richard asked for Anne Claire's photo to be placed by his bed. He looked at it for long minutes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for Lily. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to do the right thing." Richard passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning, with Lily asleep in a chair by his bed, her small hand still entwined in his. When she woke up and realized, she didn't scream or panic. Instead, she gently kissed his forehead, whispered, "I love you, Dad," and then calmly called the nurses. The funeral was huge, attended by hundreds of people whose lives Richard had touched through his clinics and institute. But Lily remained calm throughout, wearing the black dress Richard had left prepared for her, holding Mrs. Jones' hand. On his headstone, he had asked for the inscription, "Saved twice, first by Anne Claire, then by Lily. I finally learned how to live." Distant relatives again tried to contest the inheritance after his death, but everything was hermetically documented. The majority went to the Institute and to Lily in trust funds managed by reliable trustees. As Richard had specified in his will, Lily was officially raised by a carefully chosen family he had met through an adoption program, Marcus and Beatrice, a couple in their 40s with no biological children, but with enormous hearts. They had volunteered at the Anne Claire Institute and connected with Lily immediately. The transition was surprisingly smooth because Richard had spent his last months ensuring Lily felt comfortable with them, gradually building trust. And he had left clear instructions. Lily should visit Anne Claire's grave monthly, she should continue to see Mrs. Jones whenever she wished, and she should become involved in the Institute as she grew older. Marcus and Beatrice followed every instruction religiously, honoring Richard's memory by honoring his wishes. The years passed like leaves in the wind. Lily grew into a brilliant and compassionate girl, then a determined teenager, and finally a young adult with a clear purpose. She graduated from nursing school at 23, proudly following in her biological mother's footsteps. During her graduation ceremony, she wore 2 photos on a chain around her neck, Anne Claire and Richard, the 2 people who had shaped who she became. Her first job was, inevitably, at Chicago General Hospital where Anne Claire had worked. Walking the same hallways, she felt her mother's presence, a connection across time and space. And when she cared for patients, especially those who had made poor choices and were paying the price, she remembered Richard and treated everyone with the same non-judgmental kindness Anne Claire had shown. Lily took an active role in the Anne Claire Institute as she grew, first as a volunteer, then on the board of directors, and eventually as the executive director at 28. Under her leadership, the Institute expanded to 3 cities, helping thousands of children escape the streets and build better futures. She implemented programs that reflected her own experience, not just shelter and food, but true family, personalized education, emotional support, tangible hope. Every child who walked through the doors heard the story of Anne Claire, Richard, and Lily herself. "If I could get off the streets and build all this," she often said, "so can you. It's never too late, never too hard, never too lost." Her words carried weight because she had lived them. 20 years after Richard's death, on a warm summer afternoon, Lily was walking through Lincoln Park on her lunch break. She often went there, sitting on the same bench where Richard had wept and where she had offered that first hug that changed everything. Today, she noticed an older man, perhaps 60, sitting alone, crying silently. He looked like an executive, with expensive but rumpled clothes, his expression that of someone who had lost everything that mattered. Lily watched for a moment, memories flooding her mind. Then, as her mother had taught her, as she had done for Richard so many years ago, she approached him gently. "Excuse me, sir, I know you don't know me, but you shouldn't have to cry alone." The man looked up at her, surprised, tears still in his eyes. Why do you care? You don't know me. Lily smiled gently, that same hopeful smile she had as a child, now matured but no less genuine. Because someone once taught me that hugs save more than money, that no one should have to suffer alone, that there's always hope, even when it feels like everything is lost. She held out her hand. My name is Lily, and if you want to talk or just sit in silence together, I'm here. The man looked at this stranger, offering kindness with no strings attached, and something in his broken face began to mend. He took her hand, and they sat together as he told her about a failed business, a lost family, accumulated mistakes. Lily listened with complete attention, without judgment, exactly as she had been listened to. When he finished, she shared parts of her own story, the nurse mother who saved lives, the years on the streets scavenging, the dying millionaire who chose to honor a debt instead of ignoring it, how love had broken cycles and created possibilities. The man listened in awe, gradually realizing he was talking to someone extraordinary, disguised as an ordinary person. You do this for everyone? Help strangers like this? Lily shook her head. No, not everyone. But when I see someone in need, when I feel that calling my mother always talked about, yes, because that's how I was saved. And now it's my turn to save others. She gave the man a card for the Anne Claire Institute. If you need real help to start over, we're here. Months later, that man, whose name was Paul, was among the speakers at the Anne Claire Institute's 20th anniversary event. He told the story of how he was about to commit suicide that day in the park, how a stranger saved him with simple kindness, how he managed to rebuild his life with the Institute's support. Lily was in the audience listening, tears streaming freely, because she finally understood completely, a legacy doesn't die with a person. Anne Claire saved Richard. Richard saved Lily. Lily saved Paul. And Paul would save others. It was an endless river of redemption flowing through the generations, touched by those brave enough to choose love over indifference. The circle was complete, but instead of ending, it just expanded forever. That night, after all the guests had gone, Lily visited the cemetery where Anne Claire and Richard were buried side by side. She had managed it with special permissions. She placed fresh flowers on both graves and sat on the grass between them. Mom, Dad, 20 years. 20 years since you left, Dad. 30 since you left us, Mom. But you never really left, you know? You live on in every child we help, in every life we transform, in every hug we offer. She touched both headstones gently. I am who I am because of both of you, and I'll keep making you proud every day I have left. I promise. The wind blew softly through the trees, carrying the scent of flowers and something that felt like a promise, or perhaps a blessing. Lily drove home that night, to the apartment she had bought in the same building where Richard had lived. She could never completely leave the place of so many memories. Mrs. Joan, now in her 80s, lived with her, the two of them caring for each other in a makeshift but perfect family. Marcus and Beatrice visited regularly, grandparents of the heart to the future children Lily still planned to have. On the living room wall hung 3 large photos, as Claire in her nurse's uniform, smiling, tired but happy. Richard with Lily on his lap on the day of the official adoption, both beaming with enormous smiles, and an adult Lily at her nursing graduation, surrounded by everyone she loved. 3 generations, 3 stories, 1 lesson. Sometimes saving someone is only the beginning of the story. True gratitude is shown in actions that echo for generations, creating ripples of love that never truly end.